Greetings, Gilliam the Rogue here, once again, back with another build video. In today's video, we will be discussing the Magicka Nightblade in PvE DPS application. This will work for group and solo play, however you will have to be able to discern for yourself and find what works best for you in the breadth of advice that I offer. Again, as with all videos, I really want to give a massive shout out to the people who help and support me through my Patreon, just enabling me so much more than I'd be able to do without you. Again, I would be nothing without you guys. So thank you for all of the contributions of support, financial help and alleviation of stress, and just everything. You're awesome. As for the video itself, be ready for a lot of discussion on how to pump as much damage and efficiency out of the Magicka Nightblade as possible. Hope you guys enjoy. Not too much has changed with the Magicka Nightblade in terms of gear. Our CP allocation has changed dramatically. I mean, everyone kind of has. Racial choices about the same. Gear choices pretty much identical from what we were running. One small change. Well, one gear set change, which was already part of the old setup, but is now much more powerful than before. And our rotation is actually a lot better, and our DPS potential is a lot better. So the Magicka Nightblade is actually really high up. Not the best Magicka DPS at the moment, but it is in a much better place. And while it might not post the best target dummy DPS in the world, it does post insane DPS in raid and group application because it has so much going for it. We have really good resource management compared to other classes. Siphoning attacks did get nerfed into the ground, but it's still better than anything else out there. So it's important to keep in mind that just because it feels bad compared to what it used to be, keep in mind, what does it feel like for the other guy, the Dragon Knight who has shitty battle roar, or the Sork who has just regen and recovery, or cost reduction. So we have tools that other classes don't that allow us to shine really well in group application in the actual heat of combat. Again, target dummy, it's not going to look that great because we don't have a lot of self buffs that make our numbers look rather inflated. The only thing we have access to is 100% minor berserk, which is fantastic, but we don't have other utility sources in solo application that give us crazy damage. More so, we have better sustain and really good healing. So let's start off by talking about what race to pick. In Morrowind, the racial changes didn't change too much, although the order of how important they are did fluctuate a tiny bit. So in terms of raw power, overall DPS, Dunmer, still the best. The amount of flame damage that we do is astronomical. If we open up a quick little parse of what I've been tinkering around with, this is not the best I've gotten, but we see light attacks, that's flame damage, blockade of fire, flame damage, shooting star, flame damage, Grothdar, flame damage, burning, heavy attacks, all of these things are flame damage, so we have a lot of flame damage to our kit, so that 7% that we get from Dunmer is really strong. We do get 2% shock and frost. The frost is meh, it's whatever, unless you're using force pulse. If you can sustain it, that's really great. That makes Dunmer really OP because it's just insane in terms of damage production. That 7% goes a long way. And then the 2% shock damage in a trial, a lot of times you're going to be running a flame staff front bar and a lightning staff off bar, so you're going to have that 2% extra damage with all of your shock attacks. So that's really great. We also have 9% max Magicka. Pretty straightforward, really nice, helps our sustain in the form of that we just have more resources to cast from, as well as giving us extra damage and healing from scaling. And then we get 6% stamina. This is rather lackluster in terms of DPS application, but it's phenomenal in terms of staying alive in a trial, because you have to block, you have to dodge, you have to run, you have to do all of these things in a trial to avoid damage and prevent you from dying. So that stamina isn't completely useless, which makes it very nice. Furthermore, we're also going to get 2.25% damage reduction from all flame attacks, or I think it's actually 3.15%, excuse me, from all fire damage because the Dunmer. So that means if you want to go vampire this patch, that's actually a feasible thing to do now. Granted, in dungeons or trials with lots of fire damage, you're still probably going to want to go back to stage 1 so you don't have that vampirism, but in things like hard mode Rakat or Sanctum Ophidia, where there isn't much or any flame damage, that extra 10% Magicka recovery will be really nice and that little bit of flame damage we do take will be mitigated by the Dunmerry passive. So Dunmer, best choice. Second best, High Elf. Now, they've risen up in order because they have that 9% max Magicka recovery. They have 1% more max Magicka, so they have 10%. Dunmer has 9, so that 1%, that's kind of nice, but it doesn't get them back in line with that 7% fire damage because High Elf only has 4% fire, shock, and lightning. So if you're using Force Pulse, that's almost equal in terms of the Dunmer damage because all that stuff adds up together to 12%, while the Dunmer's only comes to 11%. So Force Pulse damage 1% stronger than a Dunmer. But again, in this patch, resources are really hard, so Force Pulse is very difficult. We'll talk more about why. But High Elf still really, really good. It has that Magicka regeneration, but if you go Vampire, you're not going to have that extra mitigation, so High Elf kind of falls down because Dunmer can be a Vampire, get 10% regen with less of a fire damage incur, while High Elf has that higher damage taken from Flame because they don't have that passive and a 9%. So it kind of equalizes it to almost identical. But granted, you can go Vampire on High Elf as well without that much of a loss, especially in places where there isn't much fire damage. So if you really need that regen, then High Elf is really good for Sustain. Third best race is Breton. They don't boast a lot of damage, but they have cost reduction, and that's super helpful. It's actually a little bit mitigated on the Nightblade because some of our spells actually cost much less than other classes, and that's going to be a big reason why we're able to do such great DPS this patch, is because we have more resources than everyone. So Breton's power kind of is mitigated because you have a smaller cost pool on our abilities, so that percent reduction becomes less efficient, because remember, with percentages, the higher the number, the more efficient a percent is. But if you have a smaller number, then it's not that great. And since we have smaller numbers, Breton isn't that phenomenal on a Nightblade. It's still decent, and again, you can do any race for anything in this game as long as you're not trying to compete. You're not going to be able to do crazy stuff like posting 40k single target DPS or doing competitive leaderboard runs, but not everyone's about that. Some people just want to have fun, they want to RP, they want to look however they want to look, so don't feel like you have to choose one of these three races to play the game. You're going to be able to play, but you're just not going to be able to be competitive about it. Okay, now let's talk about Mundus Stone. Thief, still the best. No doubts about it. Not much to talk about here. It gives 11% weapon and spell crit. It just gives us a lot of DPS, especially since our crit hit damage is going to be a little bit higher because we're a Nightblade. We have that Hemorrhage passive that gives us an extra 10% crit hit damage that no one else gets. So that goes to healing and damage, making it really, really great. In terms of consumables, we're going to mainly be using the Buy Health Magicka stat food because we have so much built-in resource management that we don't really need the other options. Now, I will suggest it if you're really struggling or you have lower CP, but most of the time in endgame application, you really want this max health, max Magicka, so you can get that higher resource pool and get that higher health pool, because notice, without food, I'm at 11k. If I eat this, I go up to 17k, and that's without Warhorn or Maturation, that's without Ebon, so in a raid, I'll have like 21, 22k health with all of my buffs up, so that makes me really, really tanky and not susceptible to getting one-shot. If you do have a lot of resource management, I don't have any on me, but you can use the Witch Mother's Brew. It's going to have less health, less Magicka, but it's going to have Magicka recovery, so your Magicka recovery is going to be easily over 1k, helping you sustain much longer in combat. So if you're doing really, really long fights and you can suffer the Magicka loss by putting like either attribute points into health to get that back up to 17k or use enchants, then Witch Mothers is going to be really, really great. But again, Magicka Nightblade has a lot of built-in resource management and low cost paired with it, so we can kind of get away with still using that. Again, if you have troubles, you can use that as an option. As for potions, we are going to be using the tried and true spell power potions. They do not need to have prophecy on them because we will be double barring inner light. This is because lots and lots of max Magicka and regeneration from that. But you will want major sorcery, and you definitely want that big chunk of Magicka back. even if you aren't doing endgame content, you're going to want to be drinking potions. So that's why I carry a lot of junk ones. I call them junk or trash pots that you just find on dead bodies of, you guessed it, trash mobs. So like the guys that don't care, don't have names, you just laugh at as they die, they're going to drop potions that give a little tiny bit of magicka or stamina or health back. I always carry these on me because we have a thing called the Catalyst passive, which gives us 20 ultimate when we drink a potion. So that's going to be really important to make use out of, so you always want to make sure you're getting that magicka back in any form. Again, endgame DPS, spell power pots, you need that sorcery. Now in AoE situations, you don't need that, because we're going to have prophecy from Inner Light, and we're going to have sorcery from our AoE spammable sap essence. So you can just use a crafted magicka potion or something, whatever you like, just make sure it has magicka, because you really need these resources this patch. So that covers pretty much everything with that. I guess let's start talking about gear. I guess I should mention one little other thing. If you need extra resource management, like you can't keep up for some reason, you're having a really hard time with it, you can craft drain magicka potions. It's a mixture of lady smock and bug loss. You mix these two together with an alkahest, that's the highest poison ingredient we have. We'll make really nice poisons that allow you to drain magicka. I believe you get like 238 magicka every second, and if you just have those two, it's 5 ticks on a 10-second cooldown. However, you can put a Columbine in there and make it a drain health and magicka poison, so you'll deal some extra damage, get healing from it, and then you'll get the magicka back, but it'll only be 4 seconds. So you only get 4 ticks instead of 5, but that extra damage and healing really helps your DPS kind of go back up to where it needs to be. Now, if you're going to do this and you have a Maelstrom staff, do not put it on the Maelstrom staff, because that extra weave damage is really, really big. Instead, put it on your back bar, like if you have a junk staff or a moon dancer staff or something of the sort, put it on that. Now, if you don't have a Maelstrom staff and you don't have that juicy crusher or the crushing wall enchant, then you can put that on your front bar and your resources are going to be stellar. But again, it's not optimal, but again, it's an option if you're just really, really struggling and you need to make something happen with your resource pool. Because again, while it might not be the best mathematically and like for the best players, if you're not the best player and you can't utilize the tools that the top 1% is able to, then it's useless to you. So that information becomes redundant and you need some other semblance of power. So taking that DPS loss on paper is a DPS gain for you because you're not at that level yet. And then just slowly ease off of that. Okay, now let's talk about gear. Gear has pretty much not changed at all. We're still running 2-piece Grothdar. It's just really, really strong. Again, if you are at range, you can use Valken Scoria or you can use Elambris. Elambris is going to be really good on trash because, again, we're using a lightning and a fire staff, so getting those dual procs is going to be phenomenal. On single target, we should not be using a lightning staff unless, again, we have a lot of resource management issues. Then you can use Elambris. It's going to be great. It's going to be ranged options. It's going to have really nice DPS. So it's really, really good. But if you're able to go melee form, which most Magicka Nightblades these days are capable of because we're pulling decent enough damage, DKs have kind of fallen a little bit down the line, so melee slots have opened up, then we're going to want to run Grothdar. It's just by far superior. It does tons of damage. AoE follows our position, so we don't have to worry about mobs moving out of it. Gives us that juicy max Magicka. And then our main 5-piece is going to be Scathing Mage this patch, and that's because Burning Spellweave got nerfed. In most situations, Burning Spellweave is actually worse than Scathing in most applications, unless you just had really, really good RNG. Then Burning was going to win prior to Morrowind when it was that 600 spell damage with a 20% chance to proc, but Scathing was still up much, much more. It just was harder to make sense out of because it required that 100% twisting path, really good weaving, and so on. But this patch, since that Burning Spellweave nerfed, we have completely removed it from our bars. If you haven't gotten your Burning Spellweave, rejoice, you don't need to get it anymore. Instead, we need Scathing Mage. So that means lots of ICP. If you haven't done it, you can, remember, you can buy those keys from the bank. Let me go find mine. But you can get those key fragments now because they're BOE, or they're not even bind anymore. You can buy these from traders. They come from districts. You can, and then go into Imperial City Prison or White Gold Tower and open those chests. Remember, Scathing Mage is going to come from Imperial City prisons. You can buy a shit ton of those and farm your luck, or you can just farm the dungeon itself. It's going to be really, really worth it, because Scathing Mage is going to have always upwards of 60% uptime, which means that it's going to have more damage than Julianos, because in order for Scathing Mage to equalize to that 300 spell damage of Julianos, you need roughly a 58% uptime. Since it's always going to be above that, it's always going to be better. Furthermore, Scathing Mage actually has an insanely high uptime. So here, 63%, kind of meh, not that big of a deal. Here, 81% in the same fight. So yeah, it's RNG, but we have potential to have insane uptimes on Scathing Mage, getting way more efficiency, just making it blow everything else out of the water in terms of DPS potential. So Scathing, Scathing, Scathing. Really, really strong. Yes, it sucks to have to go farm, but hey, it's worth that grind. So if you haven't gotten your Scathing yet and you want to go farm, then stick with Julianos if you want that big DPS. Again, if you're having sustain issues and you don't like using poisons because it costs too much and you don't want to do lightning staff heavy attacks all day, then you can run either 5-piece Alteration Mastery or Seducer. Seducer is going to be easier to get, it's craftable, but Alteration Mastery gives 2% less cost reduction, but it actually gives tons and tons. It gives ultimate cost reduction, block, dodge, all cost reductions are reduced with Alteration Mastery, making it much, much stronger, giving us more DPS than Seducer. But it's going to be BOE, and it's a very pricey set because it's so good for PvE and PvP now. So those are your two options if you're a beginner. Again, Seducer, really great, 8% cost reduction, lots of sustain, means you're probably not going to go too much. And then ease into that Scathing Mage once you get it. Otherwise, if you're okay with resources, and then just go with Julianos. As for 3-piece set, we're going to start off with Willpower, or if we are doing a full BOE set, we're going to be using Mother Sorrow. So that comes from Deshaan, Overland events, world bosses, dolmens, etc. You can put it on your jewelry and your helmet and shoulders, since you're not going to have access to monster sets because you're a new player. So you can do that with like 5 Seducer or Alteration Mastery for an all-crafted / BOE setup. As you ease in, you get that juicy Scathing, and you start dipping your feet into harder content, swap out Mother Sorrow for a 2-piece monster set. Again, either Scoria, Elambris, or Garothdar. And then our 3-piece slot will be devoted to Willpower. And now that comes from Imperial City. Again, you can get it in treasure vaults from the districts, so like the Arboretum and stuff like that. It's a really strong 3-piece, gives a butt ton of max Magicka and spell damage, so really, really nice. And then as you go into Trials, if you're really interested in it, then you'll be able to use 3-piece Moondancer or an Infall. Moondancer comes from Mauve Lorcage only. Infallible Aether comes from all of the Craglorn trials, or you can use the Master Architect from the new trial, Halls of Fabrication. That's another really good 3-piece. They all give pretty much the same thing. I believe Infall has a spell crit bonus instead of max Magicka, so in sustained fights, Infall will be great. In burstier, shorter fights, Moondancer is better. So the other really nice thing about this is that since we're running a Maelstrom staff in the optimal setup, that means our back bar is going to have a free slot, which again, we can use another Maelstrom staff if we are lucky enough. You'll want to have 1 flame, 1 lightning, because lightning for AoE, flame for single target, or you can use a Moondancer staff. Again, you're going to want 1 of each. 1 is lightning, and then 1 is flame, so that you can have the ability to diversify. Alright, am I doing trash? I want a lightning staff. Am I doing a boss with lots of adds? Want a lightning staff. That's because that Trifocus, or the Ancient Knowledge passive, we'll talk more about it later. But 4-piece Moondancer, Infall, or Master Architect going to give lots of damage. And the other thing is you can put a Berserker enchant on your back bar and get like roughly a 40% uptime, giving us a nice boost to our spell damage in combat. Pretty straightforward. You're going to want Sharpened on both weapons. Sharpened is still optimal because, especially these days, tanks aren't running Alkosh as much. They still should be using Crusher enchant, so we still should be at armor penetration cap with Sharpened. Without Sharpened, you're going to see a big DPS loss, especially since things like Alkosh aren't being run, and buff times aren't up 100% because everyone's struggling with resources. So Sharpened, optimal, but you can use that precise and then put a little bit of points into the erosion or spell erosion CP node because it's not that much of a DPS loss. But still, in optimal situations, you are going to see a benefit from running 0 into spell erosion, put those front-loaded points elsewhere in our other nodes, get way more damage, and then use that sharpen, because the math just adds up to that. A lot of people think otherwise. They think, hey, it only takes 30 points to get a lot of spell erosion now, and that's great, but that also means that you're losing a lot of 30 points elsewhere. That same front-loaded precipice or idea applies. So I gain a bunch of spell damage or spell penetration here, but I'm losing a bunch of either flat damage or critical hit damage or dot damage. So it's not that big of a gain. It's actually a loss. So we want sharpened optimal. But again, if you don't have it, don't worry about it. Just put some points into erosion until you get that big, fat, juicy sharpened staff. Okay, so I should mention that there is one other slight deviation. I haven't tested it too much because I don't have access to it yet because it's going to be a really long grind, but 5-piece Master Architect. That's the one from Halls of Fabrication that I was talking about as a 3 and 4 piece. In very, very niche application, that will be a monstrous set because upon activating an ultimate, you'll give yourself and 2 nearby allies Major Slayer, increasing your damage in Dungeons and Trials by 15% instead of the 5%. It will stack, but it is multiplicative, not additive, so it's not going to be a big number. You're not going to get a flat 15% damage modifier. It's going to roughly come to about 11 or 12% after we look at some of our things. Some things will even get less because it's, again, multiplicative. It's a percent of how many other percents you have amplifying your ability. So it's not as OP as people think. On a target dummy, it's going to look really, really great because it's single target. You don't have to worry about losing AoE damage from not having Meteor or something else. And it's just going to look bigger because it's a smaller fight. Now, in a larger fight, it's not going to be up 100% of the time. It's only going to be going to 2 allies out of the 6 or 8 DPS that you have. So it's not as super OP as people think. But again, in very niche application, mainly super single target, so like Manticora or Serpent, it's going to be really nice because you're just sitting there AFK DPSing a boss. So you're going to get that single target isn't going to be that big of an issue because when you're doing that, you're going to have to spam Soul Harvest, and that only costs 70 ult, so that's going to be up a lot. But in AoE fights where there's lots of other adds, that means I can't use Shooting Star or my Destro ultimate, so I am going to lose in those places, and that's why it's not a completely applicable gear set of why we want to run this. So that covers gear. I know that was a little bit long-winded. So again, recap. If you're beginning, start with 5 Seducer / Alteration Mastery, and then 5 Mother Sorrow. And then as you ease into that Scathing Mage or Julianos, use that as your main 5-piece. Use a 2-piece monster set, Grothdar, Valken, or Alambris. And then use 3-piece Willpower, or Moondancer, Infel, or Master Architect, and then you have that option to use 5-piece Master Architect in pure single target application. So as for enchants, all max Magicka on gear, all divines on gear, spell damage enchants. If you have Maelstrom, don't override it, and if you don't, use Berserker. The other thing I should notice or mention is if you're having sustain issues, go all 7 light, and if you're not having sustain issues, go with 5-1-1. So 7 or 5 light, 1 medium, 1 heavy, because you get that big fat Undaunted passive, meaning much more health, you get a little bit extra mitigation, and it just offers more DPS. But again, if you are having sustain issues, having no sustain or no Magicka to cast spells means you're losing damage. So you can lose that 4% Magicka and stamina, but gain that extra cost reduction and regen. So some players will see 7 light as a DPS gain for them. But as a Nightblade, again, we have a lot of resource management built in, so we can kind of get away with this. Alright, so that covers pretty much everything from that. Let's talk about CP now. So Red Tree, going to be the same for any DPS in the game. Right now, we're doing 49 Hardy and Elemental Defender. You want to spend these first. There's a bug right now where if you don't spend these first, you'll get less mitigation than intended. So always do 49 Hardy, Ele Defender, commit those points, and then spend the rest after that. Then we're going to do 61 Ironclad. That's because almost all trial or group damage comes from direct damage, so non-dots. This means AoEs, ranged attacks, anything that hits you once per attack. If it hits you multiple times and it's the same attack in a duration, then it's going to be damage over time. Now, there isn't a lot of this, but in places like Sanctum Ophidia and a few instances in other trials, there's going to be a lot of dot damage. So thick-skinned is still very important. You're wanting about 28 in there. If you're doing SO, maybe bump this up to about 40. And then you have another 20 or so points, 23 points to spend wherever you want. This is what I like. I like 7 quick recovery because I like getting extra heals from myself and my group. So my healers do 2% more healing to me. I get 2% more healing from myself. 11 from Expert Defender. This is really nice if you don't have a tank who's capable of taunting every little ad. So if you're doing dungeons, all the little guys, there's no reason for your tank to taunt every single one of them. He can leave some of them alone, and their light and heavy attacks are going to do damage, so reducing that helps. This works in trials as well. When you're doing trash fights, a lot of that damage is light and heavy attacks from those mobs, and your tank can't get everything because there's like 50 things on screen. So getting Expert Defender helps. And then 5 into Bastion because we will be using a damage shield in a group or trial setup, or even if we're doing Maelstrom Arena alone or overland bosses or whatever. In solo, Harness Magic is really good. In the Thief, we're going to be doing the same about as any Magicka build. 100 Arcanist, need that recovery. 100 Tenacity to increase the Magicka return of our fully charged heavy attacks. Really straightforward. And then you have a bunch of free points. I just do 2 Shadow Ward, 1% block cost, 2 Tumbling, 2% roll dodge cost reduction, Bash Focus, Sprinter, and Warlord. I just spread them all out. Just, again, make sure you are above a percent or a whole percent integer because the game will round down. That's why I have my points spent the way I do in here. But now let's talk about Blue Tree. This is the most important part. This is where you want to pay attention. 20 into Thaumaturge. Most builds see damage over time as their #1 source of damage. As in the Magicka Nightblade, that is not so much the case. A lot of our dots have direct damage parts of them, so like Crippling Grasp, it has an initial hit and then a dot. So Thaumaturge isn't super applicable to the entire thing. Same thing with Shooting Star. It has an initial hit and then a dot. So a lot of our kit has direct damage, and the most confusing part about that is Twisting Path. Twisting Path has been receiving buff after buff after buff, making it really, really strong. Now, it was getting those buffs because it wasn't being treated as a damage over time, so it wasn't getting that extra Thaumaturge scaling. It was being treated as direct damage, so it was proccing Scathing Mage. That's why it's BIS for us. So we didn't have that node, and now we do. We have Master at Arms, so Twisting Path gets another 20% bonus. And Relentless Focus or Merciless Resolve, that's direct damage. Big, big, big. Our weave damage, we have most of our damage comes from weaving actually, so Master at Arms is just really, really strong. So again, 20 Thaumaturge, 56 Master at Arms, 29 Staff Expert, because again, a lot of our damage is coming from our weaving. Almost 20% in some cases comes from that. So it's really important to bolster that up. That also helps the new player, because if you have to heavy attack more frequently than other players, then you're going to not lose that much DPS, and you're not going to have to worry about changing your CP because you already have a benefit of spending points in here. Then we're going to have 49 in Elemental Expert and 56 into Elfborn. Again, if you struggle with resource management, you can take a little bit out of Elfborn, maybe go down to about 15% increase, and then spend those points into Staff Expert because you're probably going to be heavy attacking more often than not. There isn't really much of a deviation with this. Some players find other things, but remember that CP is best for your playstyle. So what kind of abilities you're doing, what your percent hit chance on weaves is. So if you hit every single weave, then Staff Expert's OP. But if you're missing a lot of weaves and stuff, then you're going to have a different CP distribution. So just find what works for you. Remember, you need to be above that percent or that whole percent integer so the game does not round down. Okay, so now we'll talk about abilities and then go into the rotation segment. So for our front bar, in single target damage, we're going to be using, again, an Inferno Staff. This is because we want Blockade of Fire. Does 20% more damage against burning enemies. Guess what? Burning is going to be up a lot, especially if there are Dragonites in the group, because all of their damage is fire. Burning Spellweave is still very strong for them, and Burning Spellweave guarantees a proc of burning, meaning that uptime in group or trial application, burning is going to be almost up 100%, making Blockade of Fire the clear winner in terms of damage. Furthermore, it's going to scale. Again, if a Dragonite is there, Engulfing Flames, 10% flame damage. That's 10% damage that no other element can gain access to. So burning OP, flame damage OP. We want Blockade of Fire, not lightning. So that's going to be on our front bar. This is really important in single target and AoE. It's usually first or second on our total damage depending on the application. So in cleave fights, it'll be number 1. In single target, it'll probably be number 2. Next is our spammable, Funnel Health. We have 2 options here. Or 3, I guess. Funnel Health is the go-to for most players. It costs very, very little. I know a lot of people got mad when the cost increase went up, but that was because Morrowind was coming. They knew ahead of time. Imagine that. Developers knowing what they're going to do. So that cost is actually much cheaper than anything else. If we look at Force Pulse, it costs over 700 Magicka more per cast. So Funnel Health is really cheap, and it's going to be a big reason why the Nightblade can sustain their Magicka during a fight, allowing them to have better DPS. The other nice thing about Funnel is that it's going to heal you and one nearby ally for 26% of the damage done every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So you get 5 heal ticks out of this. It's really, really nice. If you crit, the heal becomes a crit. It's really, really strong. It helps a lot, especially in dungeons. Not so much in trials because there's 8 DPS or 12 people in a raid, so only hitting one ally isn't that big. But in a dungeon, you're hitting 50% of the group, you and yourself, and then there are 2 others. So that's really, really strong. If you are somehow capable of sustaining resources because you are MLG or you just have so much group sustain from like Worm and Perfect Orbs and 100% Magicka Steel and you're using Witch Mother's Brew maybe, you're going to want to turn that into Force Pulse. And that's because Force Pulse actually beats point per point Funnel Health in terms of damage. If you add all of these up, it is actually better than Funnel Health and will further scale in a raid because, again, Engulfing Flames, that's another 10% flame damage. The other really nice thing about Force Pulse is that it procs Burning, Chilled, and Concussed like fucking nuts. And Burning, that's more DPS for you and anyone using Blockade of Fire. Concussed, that means enemies that are in Lightning Wall of Elements will be set off balance, and anyone with the Exploiter passive will do 10% more damage during the duration, or the next heavy attack done to that target will do 70% additional damage. So off balance, fucking OP. Concussed plus Lightning Wall, which your healers should be running in an organized group, makes off balance. So that's really, really strong. Having that for group DPS in the form of utility is very powerful, and it's why Force Pulse is so, so nice. So if you can stomach that resource cost increase at the gain of the group, then it's going to be really strong. And then, again, if you're solo, you can use the other morph of Funnel. It's called Swallow Soul. You're going to get Minor Vitality, increasing all healing received by 8%. Pretty straightforward, quite nice. Alright, next is our dot. This is called Crippling Grasp. There's 2 options for this. They're the same ability but different morphs. So if you're really struggling with resources, you're going to want to take Debilitate. This is because when the effect ends or the target is killed, you get 50% of that cost back from the skill, helping your Magicka sustain tremendously. It also removes the target cap because Crippling Grasp can only be placed on one target. Debilitate has an infinite amount of targets it can be casted upon, so it's really, really nice for AoE or cleave situations too. Otherwise, most players, especially if you're trying to do single target in competitive play, Crippling Grasp is your go-to. It has initial hit damage, it immobilizes an enemy, although that's rather redundant in PvE, but then it's going to also have an 8-second dot. And the reason we take this for single target is just that initial hit damage helps bolster our DPS. The damage over time isn't going to be astronomical, but it is still going to be worth running 100% of the time outside of Execute, and then it's also going to activate a Siphoner passive, giving us 8% max Magicka on this bar, as well as 2 ultimate whenever we cast it on a 4-second cooldown. Alright, next is Merciless Resolve. This is our most important thing as a Magicka Nightblade. It's going to be why we're hard to play, but it's going to be why we're able to do good DPS this patch. Merciless Resolve got reworked. It now requires 5 light or heavy attacks to become the Spectral Blow. Upon becoming the Spectral Blow, you may activate it, do a shit ton of damage when you fire it, and then again, if you land another 5 light or heavy attacks in that duration, it will become the Spectral Blow again. So if you're doing nothing but light attacking or heavy attacking, you can get 4 of these bad boys off in that 20-second duration. However, we're not going to be just light attacking. We're going to be doing other abilities. There's going to be times when we can't activate it perfectly, so most players will see roughly 2 to 3 shots per cast. You're never going to see 4 unless you're doing nothing but light attacking. You don't have a robust rotation. But a really good player should be getting 3 every cast, and then average players should be getting 2 or 3 every cast. So still really, really strong, very important. It's going to be why Magicka Nightblade is hard, because it convolutes our rotation, and it puts so much emphasis and importance on weaving. If you don't like weaving for whatever reason, if you're one of those people, don't play a Magicka Nightblade, because you need Merciless Resolve to be a part of the game in terms of pulling decent DPS. So if you're not doing that, you're not going to get decent DPS. And then if you're struggling with weaving and you're just not there yet, it's going to seem like the Magicka Nightblade is worse than it is. Keep at it. Just keep trying. Practice, practice, practice. Sit on that target dummy all week long if you have to, all month long. It is well worth it, especially with our resource management, our healing, tons of other stuffs. Magicka Nightblade is in a much better spot because of this change. Next is Inner Light. Again, 7% max Magicka, 2% Magicka regen. Really straightforward. Permanent Major Prophecy, getting that 10% spell crit. Really, really nice. Not much to talk about. Next, we're going to have our ultimate. This can change quite frequently. It's like the Stamina Nightblade. We're going to want to be very, very flexible. So in most single target DPS fights, you're going to want to use Shooting Star here, because Shooting Star is the best single target ultimate. If you're doing the pure single target with the Master Architect, then you're going to want to be using Soul Harvest on this bar instead, because you're going to be using that off cooldown. You're just going to be throwing it off like mad. You can use Shooting Star here as a passive slot as well, even if you're doing that and use Soul Harvest on your back bar. It's kind of up to you. But if you're not doing the Master Architect thing, then Shooting Star is going to be what you want to do for your ultimate. It's really, really strong, does great burst, has a nice dot, and then also it refunds ultimate based on target's hit. So drop this on a really stacked group of enemies and you'll get 72 ultimate back if you hit all 6, because it's 12 per enemy. Pair that with our ultimate generation from Soul Harvest on our back bar, and we can throw this off like crazy. Now, the other thing you can do is you can also run Soul Harvest here. So if you're doing a fight with lots of cleave, so like hard mode Rakat, where there's tons of assassins, and you're doing your job and you're killing them, while you might not get every killing blow, getting one killing blow makes Soul Harvest better than anything else, because that's 10 ultimate you wouldn't have gotten before. So it's really, really nice as an option there. It's going to give you 2% weapon and spell crit simply for slotting, and then you can also activate it. Instead of saving up for that big fat 200 ultimate, you can do 70 ultimate and execute, doing 20% additional damage for 6 seconds. So Soul Harvest is really good. Again, you're going to want to change it depending on where you're getting killing blows. And then our back bar, we're going to have Impale, Execute. Really straightforward. This skill is bugged. All executes and abilities with percent amps are at the moment as of June 1st. Hopefully this gets fixed on June 6th when Morrowind officially launches. But currently we're not getting as much damage out of this ability as possible. Still, it is 100% worth running. It does tremendous damage, but only cast this at targets at or under 25% health, never above that. Really straightforward. Is going to activate our Assassin passive Hemorrhage, making sure we get that juicy, fat, 10% crit hit damage. It's going to give 2% spell crit as well. Next, we're going to be using a flex spot. This, again, will depend on what we're doing. So if we're doing trials and there's lots of damage, Harness Magicka instantly becomes the most important thing to do, because we want to stay alive at all costs. Harness Magicka is super OP, 15.5k health as a shield for 6 seconds. And then anytime you absorb magic fire, lightning, or frost damage, you're going to gain 1342 Magicka anytime, and it can happen up to 3 times. So you're going to get way more Magicka back than you're actually spending. So Harness Magicka is really, really strong. Again, almost double your effective health, so really fucking OP. If we don't need this, so if we're doing stuff and we don't need a shield because we're really, really good at staying alive and are aware of mechanics, then we're going to want to use Rearming Trap. This gives us Minor Force, 10% crit hit damage. It does a little bit of damage. Even as a Magicka build, it's pretty nice. This is only going to be applicable if we also have the Destruction Staff ultimate on this bar, because we want to make sure we always have a Destro Staff on our bar so we gain that Ancient Knowledge passive. That's going to be the most important thing. So if you do run Rearming Trap, you have to run Fiery Rage. You can either run Soul Harvest front bar or Meteor when you do that. But that's going to be really important. You need Ancient Knowledge to be active. So if you don't have Ancient Knowledge active and you want to use, say, Shooting Star on your back bar because you're running Soul Harvest front bar, or maybe you're running Shooting Star on your front bar and you're running Soul Harvest back bar, then you need a Destruction Staff ability on that bar. So you have 2 options. If you're a solo player, Elemental Drain, no-brainer. Minor Magicka Steal, 300 Magicka every second, as well as Major Breach, making you do roughly 10 to 11% additional damage to a target. Really, really helpful. Now, if we're not a solo player and Elemental Drain is already being applied, then we're going to have to use a different Destruction Staff ability. And unfortunately, there aren't really any great ones other than Destructive Clench. Now, normally I fucking hate this ability. It's really weak, it costs too much, it's clunky to use unless you constantly bar swap off of it, and it lasts 8 seconds when Twisting Path lasts 11. So it doesn't line up with anything. The skill is abysmal. Like, it costs almost twice as much as Funnel Health. Yeah, it costs more than twice as much as Funnel Health. 1,700 versus 3,400. It's nuts. I hate this skill. But again, you need a Destruction Staff ability on this bar. So if you do this, you can cast it. It is a DPS gain, although it is very, very small at that. This skill is worth roughly 1,300 DPS, which is almost a loss for casting, because in terms of how you compare, if it does more damage than your spammable, it's worth casting. But since Clench costs so much and doesn't last 100% uptime because it doesn't line up with our dots, that means it's going to be mitigated and it's going to be much, much weaker. So I really hate this ability, but we need it pretty much. So I don't cast this. If I do, unless I have really good healers in Worm Cult, Throwing Orbs, Magicka Steel, all that stuff, then I will cast this, but more times than not, I will not use this. I would rather just use the Destruction Staff Ultimate and use Rearming Trap here instead, or just put on Harness so I don't die. Next ability is Twisting Path. This must be up 100% of the time if you're using Scathing Mage, because this will proc Scathing Mage. If I just cast it here, you're going to be able to see, wait, boom, Scathing Mage procs, even though it wasn't the first tick. Very, very important. It's going to be why we're going to have upwards of 90% uptime in AoE fights. It's really, really important. It's easy to use, doesn't cost too much, costs less than Flame Clench, so it's pretty straightforward. 11 seconds. It says 11.5, but it only deals damage every 1 second. This used to deal damage every 0.5 seconds. Then ZeniMax was like, hey, how do we fix Cyrodiil lag? Make everything only tick half as long, so it ticks every 1 second. But then they forgot to look at abilities like Twisting Path, which are on unequal or non-full integers. So you have to cast it every 11 seconds, not 11.5, because if you wait the 11.5, every 2 full rotations, you're missing 1 tick of Twisting Path. And yeah, that seems min-max try hard, but it's still important if you're trying to get every ounce of DPS you can. Really straightforward, really nice skill. Next is siphoning attacks. You want this on your bar 100% of the time. Yes, it sucks compared to what it used to be, but it is still really important. Successful weaves heal for 1500 health. This will be applied to percent healing. It can crit. It's very nice, and then you're going to get 106 Magicka every light or heavy attack. That's kind of meh, but it's whatever. You only need 9 light or heavy attacks to equalize, leaving you able to get 11 additional ones, giving almost twice of the initial cost just from light attacking. The other nice thing is that after the duration, it will explode for up to 4270 Magicka return. Now, if you recast this early, it will give Magicka back based on the duration. So if I cast this at 10 seconds, I'm going to get half of the 4270. So it is a percent increase. Every second is a percent integer of the 4270 up to 100% at 20 seconds. So 10 seconds is 50%. And so on. So yeah, you can do the math. You can find out what your sweet spot is of recasting it if you want to keep it up 100%. But I usually cast this every other rotation or full rotation. It won't be up 70 or 100%. It's going to be roughly up 70% or so. Yeah, 65 here, 62 here, and then 72 here. So roughly 60 to 70% uptime in an optimal rotation. But again, if you're struggling with resources, cast this 100% of the time. And then again, Inner Light, gotta be on our bar because that big fat Magicka cost. And then if you don't want to run this, you're going to lose a lot of execute damage, but you're going to gain a free slot. So if you want to run something else, you can, but you're going to lose a lot of impale damage, which is why I double bar this skill. Okay, and then again, we already talked about ultimate choices. So most of the time, I do Soul Harvest and then front bar, and then I do Meteor or Destro Ulti back bar. Now let's talk about AoE DPS, because that changes our bars completely. So in AoE situations, we need a Lightning Staff on our back bar because that gives 8% AoE damage instead of single target. We're still going to want to use Blockade of Fire because it's way better than Lightning, so we're going to put this on our Flame Staff bar. The other big thing we're going to do is we're going to put siphoning attacks here. So I have this, this, and this. And that's going to be my rotation for that bar. I'm going to take off Soul Harvest. I'm in combat for some reason. I'm going to put Elemental Rage. Why am I in combat? I'm going to put Elemental Rage on this bar when I am in large AoE situations, because this is the best AoE ultimate in the game. Unless everything's nice and bundled up, then we can use Shooting Star. And then on my back bar, I'm going to, again, keep Twisting Path here. I'm going to, again, keep Shock Clench. And then I'm going to want to use, again, Harness Magicka, because I want to be able to stay alive. And then the other big thing, the best thing about the Magicka Nightblade is that we have an AoE spammable. Almost no class has an AoE spammable that's sustainable these days. Sap Essence does a lot. It gives us major sorcery, so if we're doing lots of AoE, don't need major sorcery potions. It does really good damage. It has an 8 meters AoE radius. Most other AoEs have 6 meters for the Magicka build, making this very, very nice. It doesn't cost too much, and then it also heals us and up to 5 nearby allies for damage, and gets stronger based on how many enemies you hit. So Sap is really, really strong. So in an AoE situation, again, make sure Relentless is up, make sure Siphoning Attacks is up, place down that Blockade, and then go ham with Twisting Path, Shock Clench, and then spam Sap Essence until you need to reapply stuff. Okay, now let's fix our bars back to the single target setup. So we're going to go back with dual Fire Staff to get that 8% extra damage. And now let's talk about rotation. So again, I'm going to record, mute myself, or edit my talking and keyboard mashing out, and then talk over it as I'm going through the rotation. So again, like always, this isn't a 100% accurate representation of what this class is capable of. I'm not doing this to flex EP to show DPS potential. I'm using the low health dummy. This is not representative of what our DPS looks like. I just want to show the rotation. Before I start, I do want to note that I will be drinking a potion immediately to simulate the fact that you're going to be having either major sorcery from a group mate. So if you have like a DK tank using Igneous or molten armaments, you're going to get major sorcery. Usually you have this in the group some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, you're going to be constantly drinking potions. And the reason I'm going to drink it early and then not engage is because I want the Magicka return as I'm going through the rotation, but I want that 100% uptime. But now let's begin. So as per usual, we're going to buff up with Siphoning, Relentless, apply Ellie Drain, start off with a fully charged Heavy, drop Twisting, and then go into placing our dots. So Wall of Elements, and then Cripple. And then as soon as that happens, if you've landed all light attacks, you're going to get a Relentless proc. And now it's just going to go into the mode where I'm trying to weave funnel health as well as proccing Merciless Resolve Spectral Bow as much as possible. So if you're hitting 100% weaves, you should be able to get 3 off consistently, sometimes even being able to get 4 if you understand how the proc works, because there's a 0.1 second channel time, so if you press it the second you get that 5th light attack, you're going to recast, but if you wait just a tiny little bit, you're going to be able to shoot it. So you can get more than 3 off if possible, but again, most players will get 2 to 3. If you're really good, you'll get 3, and if you are God's gift complete madman, you will get 4 off. But I don't constantly get 4 off. I go between 3 and 4. I'm still learning the new rotation. But our potential is a lot better, and we feel a lot smoother. And the really nice thing is that since we have dots that don't line up perfectly, we have this small little window where we can heavy attack, because Twisting Path is 11 seconds, while Wall and Cripple are 8. So we have like this 3 to 4 second window when we can do heavy attacks to get resources back. So that's the really nice thing. The other thing that should be noted is that funnel health is a little bit wonky to weave. If you press too quickly, you're going to cancel your light attack. So you want to slow things down. And the same thing happens with Impale. But now that we're at Execute 25%, I'm going to swap out Strife or Funnel for Impale. But I'm going to also try and keep up my dots 100% of the time. Now you can opt to drop Cripple because it does have a rather high cost, and if it's not going to get the full duration, it's not worth it. But let's talk more about the parse itself. So here it is. Okay, we did almost 36k only with minor Magicka Steel. So in a raid or a group, this would be a lot better because I wouldn't have to stop the heavy attack. I would have those orbs coming in whenever. I wouldn't have to be applying I wouldn't have to be applying Elemental Drain myself, so I would be able to use either Trap Beast or Destructive Clench here instead. Ideally, you'd be doing Trap. And then, like, I missed a few uptimes on my ability, so let's look at my debuffs out. So, yeah, Major Breach was only up 50% or 57% of the time, so I was missing a lot of damage on that. My uptime on Minor Berserk, almost 100%. Major Expedition, almost 100%. Scathing, 70% uptime, pretty decent. That's roughly where we're going to see average out. I believe average is 73% if I took all of the testing I did. Siphoning attacks is only up 48% of the time, so my resources were a lot harder than they could have been. But yeah, pretty straightforward in terms of what we're doing. A lot of it is just watching our abilities, so making sure Blockade, Cripple are up 100% outside of Execute, using Merciless, the Spectral Bow whenever we can, and then going back to apply Twisting Path whenever we can. So in an ideal rotation, again, I wouldn't have to be consuming that global cooldown for this, and I could go right back to DPS. So I would actually see a much higher DPS gain even if I didn't have to cast it. So if I didn't put Trap or anything else here, I would see a big DPS gain because I wouldn't be consuming a global cooldown to do an ability that does no damage for me. And then doing one siphoning attack every 2 twisting paths, that'll get you almost 100% uptime. It'll be like 95 or 93. And then using Shooting Star, pre 25%, and then once you get into Execute, using Soul Harvest instead, because that's going to just bolster the shit out of your Impale. So pretty straightforward. It's going to change in AoE. I guess I could do a small demonstration of what our DPS will look like for AoE situations. So let's put Soul Harvest there. And then Destro Ultimate. Okay, so let's go over to the AoE parser, and then we'll just see a brief representation of what it would look like. So I have 5 target dummies here, or 6, sorry. So I'm not going to get AoE cap at all, but again, gonna buff up with our potion, apply siphoning, relentless, start with a heavy attack, drop this. Oh, I made a mistake. And then you're also going to want to remember to put on your lightning staff. So don't be like me and keep a flame staff on for AoE. So we want to make sure we have that lightning staff for ancient knowledge, 8% increased damage. So I guess we'll just go for about 30 seconds or so. I'm not going to talk over it, so you're going to hear keyboard mashing, but this isn't, it's just showing you what the general idea of going into an AoE situation is like. So potion up, buff up. So pretty straightforward. Notice how we don't have much of a rotation. I'm just watching my abilities. So make sure Twisting Path is down. Blockade. I have Relentless Focus. I have Siphoning Attacks. I want to make sure these things are up as much as possible. As comparing Sap Essence versus Lightning Heavy Attack, Lightning Heavy Attack is going to have a cap of how many targets it hits, while Sap Essence isn't. So if you're in a really, really big situation where you're hitting tons and tons of enemies, Sap Essence is going to win. But if you're just hitting 3 or 4 guys, then you're going to want to do the Lightning Heavy Attack. Because if we look here, the Trifocus is hitting all 5 of them, but past 6 targets, it stops. It only hits those extra targets. Because if we open up Destruction Staff and look at Trifocus, shock heavy attacks damage nearby enemies for X amount of the damage done. It hits up to 5 nearby enemies or 6 nearby enemies. But if you're in like this big group situation where stuff either isn't stacked up really well or there's more than 10 enemies or something, then you're just going to want to sit here and do Sap Essence instead, because it's going to be a way bigger DPS. But that covers pretty much everything. We went over gear, abilities, rotations. There was a lot of information in this patch, more than I've probably ever done, because there was a lot to talk about in terms of making the Magicka Nightblade great again. Haha, Trump memes, it's funny. But, like, the Magicka Nightblade is much, much harder than most people expect, because we went from being relatively easy. Yeah, we had that really clunky animation, but we could opt out of recasting Merciless Resolve whenever we wanted to, and we had tons and tons of resources in forms of siphoning attacks. Now, that has changed. We're not as OP resource solo monsters as we used to be, but we're still the best solo class out there, or one of the best solo classes out there. because, again, everyone got this nerf, not just Nightblade. So we have this tool that other classes don't. So siphoning attacks still really strong, healing is still really strong, damage production is now rewarding for that hard rotation. So hopefully Morrowind has brought a lot of changes. You're probably really confused, and this has answered as much as possible. But again, if you're still confused, if you still have questions, drop a comment. I'll get to it as soon as I can, as long as I haven't covered it somewhere in this video or answered it 50 times that day. So again, I hope this has helped. Not sure what I'm gonna do next in terms of making a video. I want to do Stamina Warden for Maelstrom Arena and make a guide about it for like group play and Maelstrom, but I need to get Vigor first because I tried to do VMA without Vigor, and yes, you can do it, but I don't want to. Maelstrom is too stressful for me. I don't have all the time in the day that people like Andy S. and those way better players have. They can just sit in there and learn every little thing because I haven't optimized everything about it. Yes, I know it, I understand it, but I'm nowhere near as knowledgeable and as good as they are at that. So I need to get Vigor, and it's going to be more for the average player sort of thing, because there are less than 10 people in the world capable of posting insane scores, so it's better to make guide videos for people who can't do that sort of thing. So yeah, Stamina Warden likely going to be next. Not 100% sure, but we'll see. But until then, I will see you guys next time. If you've liked the content in this video, consider pledging at my Patreon. The community's interest and support ensure that I can keep making content as well as looking for ways to improve. To those who already have, I truly appreciate all the support, discussion, and encouragement you all give. You are amazing. If you have feedback for this video, drop a comment below, give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, or subscribe to the channel. Other than that, I will see you guys next time.